She was just a wild thing, small and silent, crouched beneath a tangle of thorns at the edge of an abandoned orchard in southern Utah. A bobcat kitten alone, soaked to the bone, too frozen to run. Her fur clung in matted tufts. Her breath came in quick, terrified gasps. No mother, no den, no one. Until a little girl in a sunflower yellow raincoat leaned close, and whispered something so soft, so unexpected, that the kitten stopped trembling. We don't often think of wild animals as scared. We think dangerous, untouchable, even majestic. But fear, that belongs to us. Or so we think. This story will challenge that. And maybe, just maybe, it'll restore something in you that you didn't know you'd lost. Because what began with a frightened bobcat and a quiet child would unfold into a tale of unlikely friendships, small acts of rescue, and a porch light that refused to go out. It's about what happens when the wild meets kindness, when fear meets patience, and when someone, no matter how small, decides not to walk away. So if you've ever believed animals don't love you back, or that some creatures are simply beyond saving, stay close. You're about to see what happens when love whispers and the wild listens. No one saw the moment she appeared. Not the neighbors, not the mailman, not even Grandma Elaine, who usually noticed everything. But sometime after the rain started, and just before dusk slipped over the orchard, the kitten had found her way to the edge of the old porch. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She simply watched. Her body was too still for a creature so young, curled in on herself, tail tucked tight. Golden eyes wide and unblinking, she looked less like a wild animal and more like something forgotten by the world. A wisp of fur and fear, a shadow that breathed. Clara saw her first. She was 7 with a loose braid down her back, and a nose always sunburned from staying outside too long. The kind of child who paused to rescue worms from sidewalks after storms, who talked to flowers, who'd once tried to give a grasshopper a name in a dollhouse. That afternoon, Clara had been drawing on the porch chalk pictures of butterflies and clouds with smiling faces. Buddy, the old family mutt, lay nearby with his nose on his paws, dozing through the storm. And that's when Clara noticed it. A shape just beyond the corner step. Not a dog, not a raccoon. Something different. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood up slowly and took one quiet step closer, then another. The creature didn't move. Clara's heart thumped loudly in her chest. She could hear the rain dripping from the eaves, feel the storm-thick air cling to her cheeks. She knelt, and in the kind of moment you'd miss if you blinked, Clara leaned in close enough to smell the wet dirt and fur and whispered, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The bobcat blinked. Once, her ears twitched, and the trembling in her small waterlogged body stopped. It didn't make sense, not in any way adults would explain. There was no reason a wild bobcat kitten would trust a child. But sometimes, especially with animals, trust doesn't come from logic, it comes from energy. From presence, from tone, from something quiet and honest that lives between the lines. Clara didn't know what kind of cat she was looking at. She didn't know about wildlife rescue or animal behavior, or that bobcats were supposed to be dangerous. All she saw was something small and scared. So she stayed there, just breathing. Grandma Elaine came out a few minutes later, holding a mug of chamomile tea. She didn't speak at first, just watched from the doorway as her granddaughter sat beside a wild animal like they'd known each other in another life. Then quietly, she called Clara inside. When the porch was empty again, the bobcat didn't run. She didn't eat the food Clara left out, not at first. She didn't come closer, but she didn't leave either. And in wildlife rescue, that is everything. In real-life, moments like these happen more often than you'd think, but they rarely go viral. Because they're quiet. Because they take time. There's a story from a small sanctuary in Oregon where a volunteer found a young fox caught in a fence near the trail's edge. He crouched low, didn't reach out, didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes. When he finally did, all he said was, "You're okay." The fox calmed. Just like that. Experts still debate why. Some say it's tone. Others think it's the body language, kneeling, avoiding eye contact, matching breath. But those who've worked closely with wild animals know they feel intention. Not always. Not instantly. But sometimes, especially in the soft space between fight and flight, they sense when a creature, even a human one, means no harm. That's what happened with Clara and the kitten. Not controlled, not dominance, just calm, just stillness. In the days that followed, the kitten stayed close. Clara began calling her Luna, even though Elaine warned her not to get attached. Bobcats weren't pets. They weren't meant to live on porches. But Clara didn't care about meant. She cared about the now. Each afternoon, Clara would sit on the same porch step with a sketchbook in her lap. She drew birds and leaves, and Luna curled like a comma near the edge of the yard. Buddy kept watch. Some days, Luna disappeared for hours, once she was gone overnight. Clara left food anyway, whispered goodnight anyway. Because sometimes what matters isn't the answer. It's that someone bothered to ask. There's a small lesson in that moment of the whisper, one that speaks to more than just animals. We often think we need grand gestures to make change, that healing requires speeches or saving or control. But most healing begins in silence, in being near someone, creature or human, without trying to fix them, without asking them to be different. Just sitting, just staying, and maybe whispering once you're okay. For Clara, that whisper was instinct. For Luna, it was permission. Permission to breathe, to exist, to not run. And as the days passed, Luna's presence shifted. She began moving with less caution. She let Buddy pass nearby without flinching. One morning, Elaine caught a glimpse of her curled in the sun near the compost pile, eyes half-lidded, paws tucked in. Clara, meanwhile, began to learn. She read books about wildcats, asked her grandmother questions about animal behavior, habitat, and rescue. She learned that bobcats are solitary, territorial, and often misunderstood, that they are not dangerous by nature, but defensive, especially when young and alone. She learned that many baby bobcats, if found by humans too early, get taken to shelters and never rewilded, that some end up in sanctuaries. But most aren't so lucky. It made her sad, but it also made her more determined to do this right. Elaine began to guide her gently. Set up a trail cam to monitor Luna's patterns. They kept their distance, didn't try to touch, watched, learned, supported from afar. In doing so, they didn't tame Luna. They gave her a chance to grow wild safely. And isn't that the point? Not to control nature, but to protect its chances. As fall deepened and the trees around the orchard began to yellow, Luna began staying farther from the porch. She returned less frequently, only at dusk, but Clara didn't mind. "She's getting braver," she said. "That's good." One evening, a letter arrived, left at the front gate in an envelope sealed with a pressed marigold. No return address. Just a line that read, "The world needs more children who speak softly to wild things." Elaine smiled when she read it. She didn't ask who sent it. She didn't need to. That night, she hung a tiny wind chime from the porch beam. It made a sound like soft rain on leaves. For Clara, for Luna, for all the small creatures still learning not to run. We tell ourselves that wild animals are beyond us, that they are fierce, unknowable, unreachable. But sometimes all it takes is a little girl's whisper to show us that the wild isn't something to fear, it's something to understand. Luna wasn't rescued by force. She was rescued by space, by presence, by love, spoken softly. And this was only the beginning, because just beyond the fence line, just past the edge of what Clara could see, the forest was moving, shifting, shrinking, and Luna wasn't the only animal wandering closer to the edges of town. It didn't happen overnight. The trees didn't vanish in a single storm, nor did the deer stop showing up all at once. The change came like most losses do, quiet, gradual, and just slow enough for people to ignore. But not the animals. The bobcat kitten Clara found wasn't just lost. She was displaced, and the truth is, Luna wasn't the only one. Out behind Grandma Elaine's old cabin in Utah, there used to be thick groves of cottonwood and juniper that stretched toward the horizon. A stream once ran near the back fence, just narrow enough to jump across. Deer wandered through the orchard. Quail nested under the brush. Coyotes called out at night like the land still belonged to them. But then a new road came in, wider, straighter, faster. Someone bought the land next to it and cleared a patch for a weekend retreat. A few cabins popped up, a short fence, a few more driveways. The creek dried, the deer came less often. Then the quail stopped entirely. Elaine noticed. So did Clara, though she didn't have words for it yet. But Luna was living it. The woods had begun to disappear. There's something especially painful about watching nature get smaller. You expect wild animals to live out there in some distant, untouched wilderness. But the truth is, most wildlife now live in the blurry places in between. In the spaces between roads and houses, between fences and farms. That's where wild animals struggle the most. Bobcats especially are creatures of edge spaces. They're elusive, solitary, and mostly nocturnal. They don't want to be near humans, but more and more they don't have a choice. In fact, according to recent wildlife studies in the US, bobcat sightings near human dwellings have increased steadily over the past decade. Not because bobcats are getting bolder, but because we've taken so much of what used to be theirs. A real-life example from Arizona in 2020 tells the same story. A mother bobcat gave birth to 3 kittens in the crawl space of a suburban home. The area used to be an undeveloped desert. Now it was a housing development, and there was nowhere else to go. The family was removed by professionals carefully and relocated farther out into protected land. But the wildlife officers admitted cases like these are growing. And relocation isn't always an option. Not every animal makes it out. When Elaine was Clara's age, the woods behind the house were something else entirely. Her mother, Clara's great-grandmother, kept a handwritten log of every animal she saw, hawks, foxes, even the occasional mountain lion tracks. Elaine once told Clara, "You used to hear so many birds in the morning you'd forget the silence ever existed." Now, she said, the silence often came first. And what's hardest to explain to a child is that the bobcat she rescued or watched her granddaughter whisper to didn't just appear like magic. She came from a story of shrinking space. Clara had begun to notice signs too. One morning she found a shredded fast food wrapper near the back fence. Another day, muddy paw prints along the edge of the porch, too big to be Luna's, too round to be Buddy's. Once, just after sunset, she and Elaine sat quietly on the swing and heard the crack of something heavy moving through the brush. Not threatening, just close. Elaine leaned over and whispered, "They're getting squeezed." Clara didn't ask who they were. She understood. Luna had only ever shown up because she'd been pushed out. And the scary part, Clara began to realize that the same thing could happen again, not just to Luna, but to every creature who once called the woods home. This idea began to settle deep in her chest. Animals don't become dangerous when they come close to us. They become desperate. Luna hadn't growled or scratched or attacked anyone. She had just curled up in fear and waited for the world to leave her alone. That image stuck with Clara. She began asking more questions. What happens when the wild has nowhere left to go? How do we help animals without making them dependent? Can someone as small as a little girl do anything that matters? Elaine didn't have all the answers, but she offered this. We can't bring back the whole forest, but we can make this porch a safe place. One patch, one moment, one animal at a time. That's how the seed of something bigger began to grow. So they started paying attention not just to Luna, but to the land. They set up a small camera trap in the orchard, not to spy, but to listen differently. In just 1 week, they captured a deer with a limp gray fox crossing under the moonlight and a raccoon sniffing at the compost pile. The visitors were still there, just quieter, just more cautious. Clara started a notebook, The Wild Guests. Each entry had a date, a sketch, and one line about what the animal might have been feeling. Deer, tired but curious. Fox, cold paws, looking for something. Luna watched me through the rain. Didn't flinch when I blinked. This simple act, writing down what was once ignored, was a quiet rebellion. It was proof that wild things weren't gone. They were just holding their breath. The small lesson here is this: we don't always need to build sanctuaries. Sometimes it's enough to protect the space we already have. To keep a porch light on, to leave a patch of brush untrimmed, to whisper instead of shout. Because the disappearing woods aren't just trees, they're trust. And when that disappears, it takes generations to grow back. Clara's world began to widen. So did Luna's. As fall deepened, Luna was seen less and less. But the camera picked her up stronger, more confident, slipping through the night like she'd been born for it. One day, Clara found a feather at the edge of the porch. Not from Luna, of course, but from a hawk. Still warm. She held it like a secret and tucked it into her notebook. Then came a moment neither Clara nor Elaine expected. A small newspaper clipping was left in their mailbox, no envelope, no name. Just a faded photo and a headline from 1979 local woman honored for wildlife work near Juniper Creek. It was Elaine's mother, smiling beside a young deer she'd helped rehome. Clara looked up at her grandmother. "You never showed me this." Elaine only smiled. "I guess some stories wait for the right time." That night they sat on the porch with Buddy at their feet and the wind chimes singing above them. And the woods. They weren't louder, but they weren't gone. Not yet. Perspective matters. We often think we're protecting animals by keeping them far away, but maybe true protection comes from proximity. Safe proximity. The kind that doesn't cage or control, but watches, listens, respects. That's what Clara had started to learn, and she was about to be tested in a way she didn't expect. Because soon Luna wouldn't be the only animal seeking shelter, and not all wild things wear fur. She should have died that night. By every measure of nature, the little bobcat wouldn't have made it. Not in that rain, not at her age, not without a mother. Elaine knew it. She'd seen enough rescues over the years to recognize the signs: thin limbs, hollow-bellied trembling that didn't come from cold alone. Luna wasn't just lost, she was barely holding on. Yet somehow she had found her way to the edge of their porch, as if drawn by instinct or memory. Or maybe, just maybe, by that whisper. Clara first noticed something was wrong when Luna didn't come back the second night. Then the third. On the fourth, Buddy paced the porch steps at dusk, sniffing the air. The food bowl stayed untouched. The drawings Clara had left out were damp from dew. Elaine suggested waiting. Animals wander. But Clara had a quiet certainty she couldn't explain. Something was off. On the fifth morning, Clara woke before sunrise. The sky was soft pink and the orchard glistened from overnight mist. She stepped out barefoot, careful not to wake anyone, and wandered to the edge of the bramble patch near the back gate. That's where she found her. Luna was curled tightly under a patch of broken fencing, her sides rising shallowly. She didn't lift her head, didn't flinch when Clara approached. She just blinked, slow, resigned. Clara dropped to her knees. "You came back," she whispered. "But you're not okay, are you?" What Clara didn't know, what most people don't, is how quickly young wild animals can fail when their systems are stressed. A bobcat kitten weaned too early without consistent food or shelter enters a rapid decline. The body doesn't just grow slower, it begins shutting things down. Digestion, temperature regulation, even awareness. It's what rescue centers call the quiet collapse. No drama, just fading. Elaine carried Luna inside, wrapped in one of Clara's old flannel shirts. They didn't have a wildlife license to rehabilitate, but they had warmth, clean water, a space heater. They placed her gently in a wooden box lined with towels and set it near the fireplace. Buddy sat nearby, unmoving. He didn't bark. He didn't sniff. He just watched. The kitten didn't sleep. She drifted. That night, Elaine made a call to a friend in Nevada who worked at a wildlife center just past the state line. A woman named Joy who specialized in bobcats and lynx. "She's critical," Elaine said quietly over the phone, "and she trusts my granddaughter." I don't want to break that if we can help it. Joy understood. Sometimes, she said, they stay alive just long enough to feel safe. So Elaine followed the instructions. Small bits of water from a syringe, a warming pad under the box. Silence. Low light. No sudden movements. Clara stayed close, drawing in her notebook. Sketches of Luna curled into a tight ball of Buddy with his head on his paws. On the second night, Luna licked water off Clara's finger. On the third, she lifted her head when the door creaked. By the end of the week, she was walking again, slow, fragile steps like a dancer on a frozen lake. There's a real case that mirrors this story almost exactly. In 2018, a baby bobcat was found outside a campground in New Mexico, abandoned hypothermic near death. A camper had noticed her hiding beneath a pile of firewood. Local officials were called, but they didn't arrive in time. The camper, a woman named Maria, took the kitten to her tent, wrapped her in blankets, and kept her warm through the night. That kitten survived, and later, after rehabilitation, she was released into a protected preserve. Officials called it a miracle. But Maria told reporters something else. She didn't need a miracle. She just needed time. And someone to believe she was worth saving. Back in Utah, Luna began recovering. Not just physically, but behaviorally. She became more alert. She began pacing the inside edge of the porch. She even play-battled a strand of thread Clara dangled from a pencil. But something else began to change too. Something inside Clara. Because for the first time, someone depended on her. Not for entertainment, not for chores, but for safety, for healing. It was subtle, but it mattered. Children need to feel useful and not in the way grown-ups think. Clara wasn't trying to own Luna. She was trying to show up. Every morning, she cleaned Luna's water dish. Every night, she made sure the towel was still warm. She drew maps of Luna's progress. Day 7. She looked at the window like she missed the wind. Elaine never interfered. She guided, quietly, soft reminders, small adjustments. And when Clara made a mistake like trying to pet Luna without warning, Elaine helped her reflect instead of scolding. She's not tame, Elaine said gently. She's trusting you. That's different. That distinction became the small lesson Clara would remember the most. One day, Luna did something new. She climbed the back of the couch, hopped down, and sat near the front door. Just sat. Clara froze. Elaine watched. Then slowly, Luna walked to the porch screen door and sat again. Elaine rose, opened it gently, and waited. Luna stepped out. Not with fear, with purpose. She paused on the steps, turned once to look back, then vanished into the orchard. It was both a loss and a victory. Clara didn't cry. She wanted to, but she didn't. "She's doing what she's supposed to do, right?" she asked. Elaine nodded. "She came to us broken. Now she's stronger." Buddy sniffed the air. His tail gave a quiet wag. That night, Clara placed one final sketch on the porch, a drawing of Luna looking back over her shoulder, the orchard behind her. She wrote, "Come visit when you want. I'll leave the light on." The fresh perspective in this part of the story is simple but powerful. Some animals survive not because we control them, but because we let them go at the right time. Rescue isn't about keeping. It's about giving them what they need to return to who they were meant to be. That's true for animals. It's true for people. And it's especially true for children learning how to care. The next few days were quiet. Luna didn't return, but Clara still set out food, still sat on the porch with Buddy in the afternoons. Elaine noticed something else, though. At night, there were new sounds. A rustle beyond the gate, the quick movement of paws across the mulch. Not Luna. Bigger, heavier, not dangerous, but not familiar. Elaine stepped outside one evening with a flashlight and scanned the edge of the orchard. The light flickered. Something moved just out of sight. Clara joined her. "Is it her?" Elaine shook her head. "I don't think so." Then she paused. Something else is watching, because the forest never really sleeps. and where one creature finds healing, another soon follows. The house sat at the edge of the orchard like it had grown there. Crooked porch, a wind-worn roof, the paint that used to be white. It had stood long before Clara was born, and long before her grandmother had moved back into it. People in town called it the old Hargrove place, though no one remembered who the Hargroves were anymore. Clara called it home. Not because it was shiny or new, but because it was theirs. Or rather, it had been her great-grandmother's, passed down like a memory held in two hands. Every room had a story, even if no one had spoken it in years. There was a kitchen drawer that only opened if you pulled it with your left hand. The attic that always smelled faintly of mint and mothballs. The scratch marks on the back door from a dog long gone. And the porch, the heart of it all, was where everything started and ended, including Luna. The day Luna first stepped onto that porch, something else came alive in the house. Not loudly, not all at once, but like a forgotten song slowly returning. Clara didn't know all the history, but she could feel it. Her great-grandmother Evelyn had been a quiet woman with a gift for listening, not just to people but to animals too. She used to leave out cracked bowls of water for the raccoons and possums. She kept a shoebox of feathers under her bed. She believed the world sent messages through the smallest creatures. After Evelyn passed, the house went silent for a while. Elaine moved away for work. The porch light stopped turning on. Plants withered. Neighbors passed by without looking. But now, with Luna's arrival and Clara's presence, it was as if the house itself had taken a deep breath. Elaine noticed first. It began when Clara pulled out a rusted garden chair from the shed and scrubbed it clean without being asked. Then she rearranged the potted plants on the steps. One morning, she taped her sign to the mailbox. It read, "This porch is for listening." She didn't mean just for animals. Real life is full of places like this. Homes half asleep, holding stories that haven't been told in decades. In small towns across the US, there are porches with loose railings and cracked swings that used to be gathering places for song, for stories, for healing. One such house sits just outside Asheville, North Carolina. Once owned by a retired school teacher, it became a local landmark, not because of architecture, but because she invited anyone passing by to stop for tea and leave a note on her porch table. By the time she passed, there were 100 stories, drawings, confessions, poems. All saved, that house is now a community story porch. Volunteers maintain it, and the stories keep coming. Clara didn't know about that house, but what she was creating felt similar. One note at a time, one gesture at a time, she and Elaine were turning their home into something more than a shelter. They were building a kind of sanctuary, a space for things to land when the world got too loud. But not everything in the house felt warm. One Sunday morning, Clara wandered into the back bedroom, the one no one used, and opened a drawer full of old receipts and dried-out pens. At the bottom was a photograph she'd never seen. Her grandmother, as a young girl, was holding a crow on her arm. She blinked. "Why didn't you ever show me this?" she asked later that night. Elaine glanced at the photo and smiled without quite smiling. "That was Edgar," she said. "Fell out of the nest when I was 10. I raised him until he could fly. Then he came back every spring." Clara didn't say anything for a long time. She just held the photo close, tracing the corners with her thumb. Another animal saved, another whisper in the bones of the house. "Why'd you stop?" she finally asked. Elaine looked at her. "I guess I thought nobody needed it anymore." Clara's answer was simple, I do. They began opening boxes. Not the ones marked kitchen or old clothes, but the ones that hadn't been touched in decades. Inside were ribbons from local science fairs, half-finished quilts, a broken bird cage, and a yellowed field journal filled with entries like, "A fox was seen near the garden. Healthy. Watched me for 47 seconds before walking off." The journal had belonged to Evelyn. Every page was dated. Every entry is short, specific, and full of respect. It wasn't a diary, it was a record. A kind of devotion. Clara read every page. Then she started her own. There's a small lesson here tucked between cracked spines and dusty keepsakes. We don't always need to create new meaning. Sometimes we just need to pick up where someone left off. Restoration isn't just about fixing walls or planting flowers. It's about memory. About reaching back into the quiet and asking, what was worth saving? And in a world that often tells us to throw things away, to upgrade, to forget, the act of remembering becomes a form of resistance. Clara didn't say any of this out loud, but you could see it in the way she walked, now more aware, more deliberate. Like someone carrying something fragile and important. One evening, just before the sky turned, Clara taped a new sign to the porch post. If you're lost, sit here. Elaine raised her eyebrows. Are we expecting visitors? Clara just grinned. You never know. They didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, Mr. Titsum, Harvey, the mailman who'd been delivering to the area for 20 years, left a note beside the step. This porch reminds me of one my mother used to sit on. She passed last year. Thank you for the quiet. Beneath it, Clara wrote, she would be welcome here. The next day, a woman from 2 houses down dropped off a bag of sunflower seeds with a note for the birds. And the girl with the kind eyes. And just like that, the house stopped being forgotten. It began to remember. Buddy noticed the shift too. He started sleeping closer to the porch steps, tail thumping softly whenever someone approached. He barked less, listened more. Luna didn't return every day, but when she did, she lingered longer. She sat in the sun, stared through the window. Once, Clara saw her watching the wind chime like it was speaking a language she almost remembered. A fresh perspective began to take root in Clara, one that surprised even Elaine. It wasn't just about helping animals anymore. It was about making space. For everything, for memories, for people, for quiet, for wild things and weary ones alike. Elaine found herself slowing down too. She brewed tea in the afternoons. She reread her mother's old journals. She began writing her own. And at night, when Clara was asleep, she sometimes walked barefoot to the edge of the orchard and whispered, "Thank you," to the wind, to the house, to the past. Because the truth is, some homes aren't meant to be flipped or sold. Some are meant to be kept so the stories inside don't vanish. Then one rainy morning, Clara found something unusual. On the porch bench, wrapped in a napkin, was a small object, a smooth black stone with a single word painted in white. Begin. There was no note, no name, just the message. Clara held it in her hand and looked out across the orchard. She didn't know who had left it, but somehow it felt like it had always belonged there. Because sometimes beginnings don't come with announcements. They come quietly, through whispers, through shared space, through one small act of care at a time. And on the other side of those beginnings, something else often waits. A challenge, a test of what you've built and whether it can hold up when things get shaken. Clara didn't know it yet, but her porch, their sanctuary, was about to be tested by something bigger than an animal. Buddy wasn't supposed to be the hero of this story. He was too old, too slow, too gray around the muzzle. His back legs stiffened in the mornings. His naps stretched longer each afternoon. He didn't chase sticks or howl at the moon or bark at strangers unless necessary. Most days he lay under the porch swing or near the heater vent inside, eyes half closed, listening more than reacting. But if you watched closely, and Clara always did, Buddy wasn't idle. He was present. That mattered more than anyone realized, especially to Luna. It started the day after Luna first came to the porch. Not when she was trembling and drenched, but later when she returned thinner but alert, looking for the child who had whispered kindness. Buddy saw her before Clara did. He didn't charge, didn't stand. He simply raised his head ears, tilting forward, and held her gaze. It was a quiet agreement. No teeth, no threat, just space. Elaine called it the old dog's gift. Some animals didn't need to be trained to protect. They just chose to be gentle. There's a story from Oregon of a similar kind. A sanctuary once brought in an orphaned cougar cub, too young to release, too wild to domesticate. The staff feared she wouldn't socialize, or worse, that she'd become aggressive. But one of the volunteers had an aging retriever who came with her every morning. The dogs lay near the enclosure, each day silent, still, and eventually the cub began curling up beside him through the fence at first, then beside his feet. The retriever never licked her, never played, just kept showing up. By the time the cougar was moved to her permanent home, she'd learned calm not through force, but through quiet companionship. Buddy had that same kind of presence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was steady. And it gave Luna something she hadn't known: she needed consistency. Over the weeks, Clara noticed a rhythm forming between them. Each time Luna came, Buddy would shift to make room. If Luna froze at a new sound, Buddy wouldn't react. If she crept close to the food dish, he'd wait until she finished before drinking. One day, Clara asked, "Why does he let her go first?" Elaine answered simply, "Because that's the kind of dog he's always been." But it wasn't always that way. Clara knew parts of Buddy's story, but not all of it. She knew he was older than most dogs his size. She knew he had lived with Elaine's late husband, a forest ranger, before he passed. She knew Buddy had once helped track lost hikers and even guided a wounded deer towards safety after a wildfire. But what Clara didn't know, what Elaine hadn't shared, was that after her husband died, Buddy stopped eating for almost a week. He'd lie at the base of the porch steps each day waiting, not for food, not for play, just waiting. Elaine tried music, treats, car rides, but nothing shifted until one night, deep in the middle of winter, a young fox limped into the yard. Mangy thin, one eye nearly swollen shut. It didn't come close, didn't linger, just stood at the edge of the snowbank and stared. Buddy looked back. Then, without instruction, he walked down the steps halfway toward the fox and lay down. Silent. Still. They sat like that for 20 minutes. Then the fox turned and disappeared into the dark. And the next morning, Buddy ate again. Elaine didn't tell Clara that story until much later. But when she did, Clara sat very still, one hand resting on Buddy's thick fur. "He needs to matter," Elaine had said. "Even when he hurts, especially then." That stayed with Clara. So when Luna returned skittish from a run-in with something near the creek, her ear nicked her breath fast, Clara didn't rush to her. She turned to Buddy. "Can you show her it's okay?" she whispered. And Buddy did what Buddy always did. He lay still facing the orchard, back turned just enough to give Luna the choice: come closer or don't. Either way, he'd wait. There's a quiet lesson in this, something we often forget in a world obsessed with noise, with productivity, with doing. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer is stillness, not absence. Presence. When an animal has been hurt, they don't need excitement. They need consistency, a soft gaze, predictable breath, the assurance that not everything is going to chase them. Buddy knew that better than anyone. Clara began to lean into that lesson herself. She stopped trying to lure Luna. She just sat, drew, waited. Over time, Luna began to approach more freely. Once she curled beside Buddy for nearly half an hour while Clara sketched them both. Another time, Clara caught Luna nudging her nose gently into the scruff behind Buddy's ear. No barking, no jumping, just recognition, a quiet pact. And then something shifted. One cold morning, Clara found Buddy whimpering near the shed. His leg had stiffened more than usual. Elaine guessed arthritis. They moved his bedding closer to the heater and gave him warm compresses, but still he barely moved. Clara cried softly into his fur that night, afraid. And that's when Luna came. Not just to the porch, but to the threshold of the door. She sat tense but unmoving, as if sensing something out of balance. Elaine didn't open the door. She just watched. Luna stayed until morning. By then, Buddy was able to stand again, limping slow but upright. It became clear then that the relationship wasn't one-sided. Buddy had offered Luna protection. Now she was offering presence in return. That's the thing about animal companionship. It doesn't always look like what we expect. It's not always wagging tails and tricks. Sometimes it's eye contact and silence. Sometimes it's just staying. And when Buddy began declining more visibly in the weeks that followed, Luna adjusted too. She stopped playing with her food, ate quickly, sat longer, watched more, like she knew time was moving differently. Clara noticed these small things, so she began writing them down in the journal she'd started after reading her great-grandmother's entries. Buddy wagged once when I said, "You're brave." Luna waited until I turned off the porch light before leaving. Neither of them needed words. That was her entry on the first Sunday of spring. The fresh perspective here isn't just about wild cats or aging dogs. It's about how connection doesn't always need caretaking. It needs witnessing. Too often we think love is something we must prove through action, but sometimes love is the way you stay still, the way you stay close. And for an old dog and a once-lost bobcat kitten, it was enough. As the days grew longer and the orchard filled with that pale green promise of new leaves, Buddy began sleeping outside more, not far from the steps, always facing east. One morning, Luna joined him there, curling into the space beneath his chin. Clara didn't say anything. She just sat with them until the sun climbed past the tree line. Elaine stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. She didn't speak either, because when a quiet pact holds, it speaks for itself. But change, even the gentle kind, always leads to something else. And just beyond the orchard fence, someone new was about to appear. Not an animal this time, but someone is just as fragile. Someone whose arrival would test everything Clara and Buddy and Luna had learned about trust. The first time Luna saw herself in the mirror, she panicked. It wasn't a dramatic leap or a loud crash. It was worse, a still breathless terror that locked every part of her in place. She had wandered into the mudroom just past the porch, drawn in by the open door and the warmth leaking through the floorboards. Clara had left it ajar without thinking. Luna had been curious, until she wasn't. She stared at the tall mirror propped up against the far wall, an old thing with a cracked wooden frame and a streak of dust across the top. In the reflection stood a cat, her size, her color, but with eyes too wide and muscles too tense. A stranger. She hissed flat into the ground and backed into the laundry basket with a soft thud. Her ears stayed low. Her tail lashed once, then froze. Clara heard it and came running. Luna. She stepped in too quickly, a rookie mistake. Luna darted behind the shoe rack. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. She wasn't just startled, she was ashamed. Elaine had seen it before. Not just in animals, but in people. Something is unsettling, she once said, about seeing yourself when you don't know who you are yet. It was more than fear. It was recognition. The kind that comes too soon. Clara sat outside the mudroom for an hour that day, whispering apologies. Not loud, not desperate, just steady. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said. "You're not ugly, you're just surprised. I get like that too." It wasn't about the mirror. It was about the moment Luna realized she wasn't invisible anymore. In wildlife rehab, mirror exposure isn't uncommon, but it's controversial. Some animals react with interest, others with confusion or aggression. There's a famous case from a sanctuary in Montana where a mountain lion raised in captivity was shown a mirror as enrichment. He puffed up, growled, then backed away, but not before pawing the glass with curiosity. Later, he returned on his own, lay beside the mirror, stared, slept. Staff believed it helped him orient to define the space he occupied, not just physically but psychologically. But for truly wild animals, especially those with trauma, mirrors are rarely helpful. They can trigger anxiety, even regression. Luna's reaction was a textbook example. Elaine gently moved the mirror later that evening. Not to hide it, but to reduce the surprise. She needs time to understand what she saw, she told Clara. We all do. That night, Luna didn't eat. Clara didn't push. She just placed a fresh blanket beside the porch swing, a bowl of water, and her sketchbook. She drew Luna without fear. Ears relaxed, eyes soft, a tail curled around still paws. Then she left the book open beside the bowl. The next morning, the page had paw prints on it. Smudged, slight, but there. Luna had come back, not to forgive, just to try again. That became the lesson. Not everything gets solved with comfort. Some things must be sat with, witnessed, allowed. Mistakes, especially the quiet ones, need space to stretch out before they shrink. Clara began to understand that, slowly. She didn't try to pet Luna anymore, unless Luna asked. She stopped offering food when Luna was too alert to accept it. She learned how to sit with her knees bent just so she didn't seem like a shadow looming overhead. Luna, in turn, began exploring again. Not the mudroom, not yet. But the porch, the orchard edge, even the path near the woodshed was where the leaves piled high and thick. One morning, Buddy followed her there, just a few steps behind. No barks, no chasing, just walking. A few days later, Luna approached the glass door again, this time from the outside. She sat there a long time watching her reflection. She didn't flinch, but she didn't move closer either. Clara stayed inside, just out of sight, holding her breath. There's something universal in that moment, an animal seeing itself and pausing. It feels familiar to anyone who's ever looked in the mirror during a hard season of life and not recognized the person staring back. Fear can do that, so it can change, especially when survival has demanded so much that self-awareness feels like a threat. The fresh perspective here is simple. Healing doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes healing feels like confusion, like being seen before you're ready. Like walking back toward the thing that once scared you slowly, awkwardly, with your head low and your heart thudding. It's hard to be both wild and vulnerable, but Luna was trying. And so was Clara. One evening, Clara made another mistake. She tried to reintroduce the toy mouse Luna had once batted around. It had been weeks since she'd touched it, but Clara missed that moment, the simple play, the flicker of ease. She tossed it gently onto the porch. It landed near Luna's paw. Luna flinched. She didn't hiss this time, but she turned and walked away back into the orchard. Clara bit her lip hard to keep from crying. Elaine sat beside her. "She's not rejecting you," she said. "She's rejecting what feels unfamiliar." Clara didn't answer. But that night, she didn't draw Luna. She drew herself, sitting, waiting, holding the toy mouse in both hands. She folded the page and tucked it under her pillow. Then came the realization. Not from something said, not even something done, but something left undone. Clara stopped leaving offerings. No more food bowls, no more drawings, no more whispered, "Are you okay?" from behind the screen door. Instead, she sat, each evening, a book in her lap. Her feet were tucked under her. Buddy is beside her. No expectations, no rewards. And slowly, beautifully, Luna returned, not because she was lured, because she was welcomed without pressure. On the 7th day of doing nothing, Luna jumped onto the porch railing. For the first time since the mirror, she sat facing the window, her reflection right in front of her. She didn't move, but she didn't freeze. Inside, Clara noticed something remarkable. Luna wasn't looking at her reflection anymore. She was looking through it into the house, into the space beyond, into the world that had once startled her and now simply existed. She blinked, then jumped down and curled beside Buddy, not touching, but not alone. That moment marked something important. The realization that safety isn't made through action alone. Sometimes it's what you don't do that builds the strongest trust. Later that week, Elaine received a small envelope in the mail. No stamp, just her name. Inside was a single line handwritten on a note card. "Thank you for letting the porch teach all of us." She smiled, showed it to Clara, and said nothing more. Some things don't need explaining. Clara folded the card into her journal. She titled that page "The Day the Mirror Didn't Matter." And under it she wrote, "Just because something reflects you doesn't mean it defines you." But the quiet was about to end. A new sound began echoing from the woods each night. A different rhythm of footsteps, a deeper, more urgent breath. Something or someone was watching. Luna noticed first, then Buddy, and Clara would soon find herself facing a different kind of reflection. One not made of glass, but of another child. One whose pain had no fur to hide behind. The fever came quietly. At first, it was just a little tiredness. Clara napped after lunch, didn't want to sketch, and skipped her evening walk to the edge of the orchard. Then came the shivers, the pale cheeks, the way her sentences trailed off halfway, like her thoughts couldn't quite catch up. Elaine noticed right away. A cool hand to Clara's forehead. A frown. "You're burning up, sweetheart." They tucked her into the couch blankets, piled high, herbal tea steeped and cooled. Buddy curled at her feet. Luna didn't come that day, not even a shadow by the garden fence. The house, so recently alive with small routines and quiet rituals, went still again. Not empty, but holding its breath. That night, it rained. Soft at first, then heavier. The wind rattled the porch chimes like a warning. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Elaine lit candles in the windows. Not for light, but for presence. Something about that quiet glow made her feel less alone. She sat beside Clara's sleeping form, flipping through old letters tucked in the kitchen drawer. They weren't addressed to her. Most were to Evelyn, written decades ago by neighbors, distant cousins, and a few familiar names from around town. One stood out. It was written in blue ink on thick paper, folded so many times the creases had started to tear. "Thank you for the soup when my son broke his arm. We weren't used to kindness from strangers. You made the porch feel like home." Elaine traced the words slowly, whispering them aloud. There's a tradition in some Appalachian towns when someone is sick, neighbors leave folded notes or casseroles on the porch. No doorbell, no knock, just presence, quiet love. In North Carolina, a woman named June once began leaving light notes for strangers, handwritten letters tucked into library books and bus stop benches. Each began with the same line: "If you're holding this, you're not alone." By the end of the year, over 3,000 letters had been found and shared online. People called them messages from invisible friends. Elaine didn't know about June. But that night, watching the rain blur the edges of the orchard, she felt the need to offer something. She found Clara's drawing paper, tore a sheet gently, and wrote just one sentence: "The porch is still open." She folded it, placed it in a glass jar, and set it on the top step. Then she left the light on. The next morning, Clara's fever hadn't broken, but she stirred when Buddy shifted. "Did Luna come?" she asked weakly. Elaine shook her head. "Not yet." Clara closed her eyes again. "I think she's waiting." Later that day, a new letter arrived. Not from the post office, not from the mailbox. It was tied with twine to the porch railing. Handwritten, no name. "My mother used to sit here when she needed to cry. She said this porch made silence feel safe. Thank you for keeping it alive." Elaine read it twice, then read it aloud to Clara. She smiled barely. "Can we write one back?" "Of course." Together, they composed a note. "You're welcome here anytime. Silence still lives here. So does hope." They placed it beside the jar. That evening, the porch light flickered again, but it held. The fever broke on the third day. Gently, Clara woke with color returning to her face and asked for toast. Buddy's tail thumped twice. Elaine exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding something for days. But even before Clara had recovered, something else had begun to shift. Letters, small ones, folded, taped to the steps, tucked in flower pots, slipped between porch rails. None were signed. Some were barely more than one line. "I saw a fox near the road. Is it safe here? My wife passed 3 months ago." The porch made me remember her laughter. I left a bowl of seeds for the finches. Hope they find it. They weren't addressed to anyone. And yet, they were meant for everyone. Clara began responding. 1 letter a day. Her hands were still shaky, but her words were clear. She taped them under the porch overhang, protected from the rain. Each one ended the same. "The light is still on." There's a power in a quiet community, especially when it isn't announced or organized. No leader, no agenda, just a shared space where people feel safe enough to leave something behind. Elaine started calling it the Circle, a name from one of Evelyn's old journals. In one entry, Evelyn wrote, "A circle doesn't start or end. It just holds." That's what this porch is. Clara loved that. She wrote it on a stone and placed it at the foot of the steps. Buddy curled beside it like a sentinel. Luna returned that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the soft scrape of claws on wood. Elaine saw her first. She stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea and spotted the familiar silhouette near the swing. Luna didn't flinch. Clara, hearing the chimes, came to the door. Slowly, carefully. Luna stood, walked toward her, then stopped. Not asking to come in, just showing up. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor just behind the screen. "Missed you," she whispered. Luna blinked, then turned toward the orchard. She would return the next day, and the next. The lesson here wasn't in the fever or the recovery. It was in the response. That in moments of weakness, we don't always need fixing. Sometimes we just need someone to hold the space, to keep the light on, to protect the quiet, to answer absence not with panic, but with presence. A few weeks later, Clara and Elaine added a wooden box to the porch. Painted sky blue, no lock. On the front, they stenciled, "For your letters, for your thoughts, for the things you don't know how to say out loud." People started using it. Notes about grief. Notes about stray animals. Notes about watching the stars with no one to name them with. The porch became more than a place. It became a practice of listening, of holding, of trusting that even strangers want to love something quietly. And then one morning, just as spring began to bloom across the orchard, another note arrived. This one folded tight, addressed to the girl who waited for the wildcat. It read, "I found your story online. I read about Luna, about Buddy, about you. I used to be like her, scared of being seen. I'm coming through town next week. If it's okay, I'd like to stop by." There was no name, but Clara understood. Because not all creatures who need rescue wear fur. Some come with stories, some come with silence, and some come with a need to see the light still on. Clara taped her reply to the porch rail that afternoon. "We'll be here. The porch is ready." Elaine stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. They looked out at the orchard wind brushing through the new green, the chimes ringing just once, soft and sure. Buddy shifted beside the blue box, his head resting gently on the stone Clara had placed weeks ago. Luna, watching from the edge of the garden, blinked slowly and stayed. Because when the porch light stays on, so do the stories. But the next visitor wasn't the one from the letter. It was someone else. A boy. Running, out of breath, looking back over his shoulder. And behind him something wild, not an animal, not safe. The boy came just before dusk, winded, muddy cheeks, flushed from running. No backpack, no shoes, just a worn-out hoodie and eyes that darted like something was chasing him even when nothing was. He reached the steps and stopped staring up at the porch like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to want what it offered. Clara saw him first. She didn't ask his name. Didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" She just opened the screen door, stepped back and pointed to the swing. "It's warm," she said softly. He didn't speak, but he sat. Buddy stretched his legs, then lumbered over and lay beside the boy's feet, tail wagging once. Luna, from the edge of the yard, stayed still, watching, curious, not afraid. Elaine brought out a cup of warm broth, placed it on the side table without a word. Inside the mug was a note folded small. It read, "You are not what scares you." The boy drank slowly, then curled into the corner of the swing and fell asleep. Later, Clara would learn his name was Max. That he'd been bouncing between homes since his mom passed. That his aunt lived 2 towns over, but he hadn't seen her in months. That he didn't know where he belonged, only that he didn't want to go back to wherever he'd come from that day. But right then, she didn't need to know any of that. She only needed to know he was tired and scared, and that the porch could hold him. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Over the next few months, more people came. Not always with drama, sometimes just with questions. sometimes just to sit. A widower from across the ridge brought a jar of honey and said the orchard reminded him of his wife's garden. A woman in her 60s asked if she could plant sage by the fence. For memory, she said. For grounding. A teenage girl left a watercolor of a wildcat tucked into the letterbox. Clara pinned it to the porch beam. Even the mailman began sitting on the bench for a few minutes after each delivery, hands wrapped around his coffee thermos, watching the wind move through the trees. No one called it a rescue, but it was. There's a real place like this in Texas, a farmhouse turned animal sanctuary that started with one injured bobcat and ended up becoming a space for both animals and people in need of healing. They don't call themselves a shelter, they call it a living story. Because every visitor, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4, adds something. Clara and Elaine hadn't meant to create something like that. They hadn't planned to make a wildlife rescue emotional video out of their lives. They weren't chasing anything viral. They were just paying attention to the sound of paws on wood, to the notes left in jars, to the quiet presence of those who had forgotten how to ask for comfort. One evening, Max brought a box. Inside folded clothes, a photo of his mother, and a letter from the school district asking if he was okay. He'd finally called his aunt. They were going to try again. He looked at Clara and said, "I don't know what this place is, but it made me want to stay alive." Then he set the box down and whispered, "Thank you to Buddy's fur." The lesson here is not complicated, but it's easy to forget. Healing doesn't always roar in like a miracle. Sometimes it looks like a porch light left on, a cup of broth, a dog that waits without judgment, a child who whispers gently to a creature that was told it should be feared. It looks like consistency and gentleness, and the kind of companionship that doesn't ask you to explain yourself. Over time, Luna returned less often. She grew leaner, more sure-footed. Once she brought a half-eaten squirrel and left it on the porch like a gift. Clara wrinkled her nose but said, "Thank you." "I think it means she trusts us," Elaine said, smiling. And one spring morning, they found a second set of bobcat tracks in the orchard. Not close, but near enough to say Luna was not alone anymore. They cried, quiet tears, not sad, just full. The fresh perspective is this: we are not the only ones who need a place to rest. Wild animals, even rescue humans. We all need somewhere to be safe while we figure out how to heal. That might be a house, a yard, a sun patch on the floor, or maybe it's you. Your presence, your calm, your small rituals of kindness. That too can be a porch. Elaine eventually painted a sign and nailed it above the swing. This is a home that waits, not demands, not fixes, just waits. And the porch kept filling, with letters, with drawings, with wind chimes that rang even when no one touched them, with laughter sometimes, with silence always, with moments where the wild met the human and neither had to run. And so maybe now you're thinking about your porch. Not the one attached to your house, the one inside you. Is it lit? Is it open? Do you know what it's like to be met with patience or to offer it? Maybe you've been Luna, scared, hungry, misunderstood. Maybe you've been Clara. Reaching, learning, whispering something kind into the darkness because it was all you had. Maybe you've been Buddy, tired, steady, the one who simply stayed when it mattered most. Or maybe right now you're someone who needs a porch like this. Someone who's been running, and just now you're slowing down, looking for a soft place to land. If that's you, welcome. You don't have to explain. You don't even have to speak. Just stay. There's space here. If this story touched something in you, maybe made you breathe a little softer, or think about the animals, the people, or even the past versions of yourself that still want to come home, then let the light stay on. Like this video. Subscribe if you'd like more stories like this one. And in the comments, if you're brave, tell us, what would your porch say to someone who showed up scared? We'll be reading. We'll be here. Always.